advertisement, which is in order to go and live in a haunted house, the Spite House, and to document any paranormal or weird activity. And he's gonna get paid a heck ton of money, and obviously gets to live in a place while that happens as well. So he thinks that the offer is too good to be true. He doesn't really believe in ghosts or anything, so or he believes that he can kind of handle anything. So he goes to the interview and gets the job, and then him and his two daughters move into this house. So that's the kind of premise, and everything kind of goes from there. You learn about the history of the house and the owner, and like the family, Eric and his daughters, kind of the stuff that they're dealing with, as well as it's like this weird curse thing. The person that owns the house believes that there's like a curse related to her family, relating back to like the sins of their ancestors, basically. So there's quite a few different strands and threads and like question marks that you have to kind of find out about throughout the book. And I did think that this started off really, really strongly. I enjoyed the writing. I thought the plot was like interesting, and there were a lot of likeable characters. In particular, the older daughter, Des, was like really feisty and likeable. And then the house itself, when you kind of get to see that, I think it's like such a great concept. So the idea of the Spite House is actually the house itself, and this is actually a thing that happens. Like, its main purpose for being built is just to kind of piss other people off, and you know, the main reason for building it is malice and kind of negative energy. And this particular house is built on the very top of a hill, like literally like perching as close to the edge as possible. And then in the bottom of the hill, in the shadow of this tall house that gets built, is a little orphanage. So that's where the kind of intrigue starts to build up. Like, why, like the person that built this house, why did they want to kind of have the creepy shadow of the house like ruining the orphanage, essentially? So yeah, interesting concept. The architecture of the house was really interesting as well, because it was very like precariously built. It was built very narrowly and very tall, so it had like unusual features, like a very like cramped and claustrophobic feeling, with like one weird hallway which is kind of almost suspended in thin air. And that's kind of the place where a lot of the creepy stuff starts to happen. So lots of positives in the first half of the book, but I think I just said it never really developed enough on that potential for me. I think because there were so many competing threads of stories, much like a kind of nice, cozy is probably the wrong word, but like a gentle, enjoyable book that just was nice to read. I liked the kind of focus on, the kind of the trickier elements of friendship. So for them, there was so much kind of competition and almost like obsession between the two of them. And I thought that was explored in a really interesting way. And I think that's definitely true. Maybe particularly as you're growing up, there's kind of, you can kind of love someone and be friends with them, but maybe there can also be this sort of like rivalry and jealousy. And it's, how do you deal with that? What are the dynamics of kind of power within a friendship itself? And another kind of key thing was also about the sort of the real journey that young girls go on from, a really young age through adolescence and puberty, and dealing with kind of becoming women, the way that their bodies are changing, the kind of sexualization of them from like a very shocking early age, like I feel like 12, from the age of like 12 and 13. The characters were really well developed and felt very real, and I quite liked it because they weren't perfect like both the main female characters. There were times that I was kind of annoyed with both of them, but yeah, it was just fun kind of seeing them grow up, seeing how their relationship developed, seeing them get involved with boys and kind of coming into their own like sexuality and stuff, and as well the kind of the difference that education can make and the impact that can have on your life, like the ability to access education, particularly at that time for young women. So yeah, really it was a good read. It was well written, enjoyable, but nothing like groundbreaking, I would say. But it was nice to read about, somewhere set in Italy, particularly in the summer, so I did enjoy the setting. So this book, I think I gave a 4 stars to. Book number 3 is All That's Left in the World by Eric J. Brown. And this is a book that I picked up because I loved the cover. And it's also a romance, but kind of set in post-apocalyptic world, which seemed like a fun concept. And this is another book that I felt started really well, but just never delivered quite to the level that I was hoping it was going to. So yeah, this, like I said, follows 2 guys, Andrew and Jamie, and they meet after most of the population has been wiped out by a virus, and Jamie has a cabin in a very remote area where he's kind of holed up. He has a lot of food and supplies and everything, and Andrew kind of stumbles into his life. He's wounded, and Jamie has to make a decision as to whether he's going to help him or not, and he obviously does. They end up kind of living in this cabin together for a bit while Andrew heals, and then things start to happen, like other people kind of come into their lives a little bit. Andrew has this kind of like a slight mystery his feelings for Andrew and like the lengths that he would go to for him, but it just kind of felt like a bit out of character sometimes. And even with Andrew, like he did something at one point. He did something, and it was like, why are you doing that? Like, you idiot. So their characters were like, in one hand, they were like quite lovable and good, but they were kind of frustrating too. Although there was like one absolute legend of a character who they meet along the way, who I absolutely loved. She's only in it for like a very small amount of time, but so kind of like average on that front, I would say. And then in terms of the romance, I think this was what really let it down for me, because I was really like excited by the idea of it, like the way that they kind of meet, and that initial kind of vibe felt really good. But I just don't think the author built up the tension enough, and I think partly because it is like a young adult book. So when I found out that they were both supposed to be about 18, I sort of was a bit annoyed, because I knew that meant there wasn't probably going to be any spice, which I do like if I'm reading romance, or even a bit of like, even if it's not like full spice, a little bit of kind of like steamy action. And that, I was like, okay, that's not going to happen, but I still thought we might get like lots of kind of build up and tension and like super flirty or like long lingering looks and like meeting each other's eye, and just the fun bit, like the best bit I think of romance, and it's always the build up that's the most fun, right? They kind of will they, won't they, what's the other person thinking, that side of things. And I felt like for this it just went from them kind of, maybe there was like a little bit of that at the very, very start, and then it was like we did spend some time with them, but not enough to get that tension. And then suddenly Jamie's like, oh, I think I'm in love with Andrew. So I felt like we jumped so fast to that without really getting to build up to it properly, even though a lot of time in theory had passed in the book. And then from that point, it then also felt like quite a quick jump, and no real tension before then they're kind of fully getting together. So it was kind of cute, but I really like the journey to be full of those moments and the kind of thrills and excitements of when you're kind of building that up with another person, and you're figuring out how much you like each other and how much they like you and stuff. So yeah, it let it down a little bit. I would have just liked to have developed that side of things a bit more. So overall, this one I think was also a 3-star. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't fantastic. The next book, the half a book that I read, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So when I did my book haul for this, that was the point that I realised that Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde is not this full book, which I assumed it was. Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde is this amount of pages, which is wild to me. It's like 50 pages long, which I had absolutely no idea about. I honestly thought that it must be like a full-size novel. short stories in this book are The Merry Men and Other Tales and Fables, Wheel of the Mill, The Treasure of Franchard, Olalla, Thrawn, Janet, and Markheim. I don't know if I will actually read any of those. I might do if I'm kind of looking for quite a short story, or I don't know. I'm not sure I will, but we'll see. That's why I wanted to talk about the main short story while it was fresh in my mind. And then the final book that I picked up is How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. So this is really not my usual kind of book. I don't normally read that much in the kind of crime, sort of thrillerish, I guess, genre. But I was in a really bad reading slump, and I just needed something that I knew was going to be like super easy to read. I kind of like maybe a bit predictable, like formulaic, and wasn't going to be too taxing or anything, just like kind of fun and easy. And I felt like this would fit the bill for that. I actually bought this secondhand with Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings, I think. I bought those two books. I was like, of the two of them, I think one of them will definitely like draw me in and be like a bit of a page turner. And anyway, I ended up picking this one up first. I will reserve Magnolia Parks, I think, for potentially another reading slump. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting premise. I'm going to read the blurb for you on this one. In 1965, Frances Adams was told by a fortune teller at a country fair that one day she'd be murdered. Frances spent the next 60 years trying to prevent the crime that would be her eventual demise. Of course, no one took her seriously until she was dead. For Frances, being the village busybody was a form of insurance. She'd spent a life compiling dirt on every person she met, just in case they might turn out to be her killer. In the heart of her sprawling country estate lies an eccentric library of detective work, where the right person could step in and use her findings to solve her murder. When her great niece Annie arrives from London and discovers that Frances's worst fear has come true, Annie is thrust into her great aunt's last act of revenge against her sceptical friends and family. Frances's will stipulates that the person who solves her murder will inherit her millions. Can Annie unravel the mystery and find justice for Frances, or will digging up the past lead her into the path of the killer? So yeah, kind of a bit of a quirky premise in the sense of the person kind of predicted their own murder and has kind of built up these like files on all the kind of potential suspects, and yeah, so it was fun to read, and it absolutely did what I needed it to, which was just get me out of that little slump. And I think I read it in like 2 or 3 days. So yeah, super easy to get through. I quite liked the vibe of it at times. There were moments when I felt like it almost had a slight feel of Knives Out / the Glass Onion films, which I absolutely love. I think they are so brilliant and intelligent and funny. Yeah, they're like my perfect kind of whodunits if I'm gonna watch that kind of thing. So yeah, there were times when I almost had a sense of that kind of thing because it was a bit different, I think, and set on this like sprawling country estate with like a cast of interesting characters trying to compete to solve the murderer, but it definitely didn't really live up to that standard, I would say. main character at times was a little bit annoying, and I think the kind of end revelation wasn't that much of a surprise. There were sort of two people that I had in my head that I was like, oh, I think it's going to be one or the other of them, and it was. So it was a shame that it didn't really surprise me too much. But yeah, there was some like different threads in time, because Annie finds a diary of her great aunt and ends up reading that, and it kind of tells you about her aunt's youth and the kind of mishaps and things that happen there, and it ends up becoming almost like a double murder case due to something that happens back in the past as well. So yeah, I thought it was like fun, nothing spectacular, and I did get a little bit annoyed once or twice because I felt like the dates just did not add up in the past portion of the narrative. So I just think it was a bit sloppy in terms of some of the kind of finer details of dates, times, and getting the plotting correct and that sort of thing. Yeah, it does really bug me because you start focusing on that